Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. How important is emotional intelligence? We'll find out next. Welcome back to Advanced Studio Classroom. My name is Brandon. We are continuing our psychology article. It's August 23rd. We hope you are staying cool wherever you are. And we also have two panelists back with us. First, welcome back, Josh.
Hi, Brandon. It's very good to be back today.
And Manya.
Hi, Brandon. It's also good to be back.
Great to have you all here on the program. And we're on page 35 today. What's the title of this article, Josh?
Well, the title of this article is Miracle on the Hudson Revisited.
All right, we are revisiting a miracle. That's a good thing to revisit, right? A lot of times we revisit our problems, but we're looking at a problem that was successfully dealt with, and we're actually digging into why that was. And we're talking about a captain. His name is Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, and he is or was an experienced pilot. He's now retired. This happened more than 10 years ago. It was back in just January of 2009 when this emergency landing took place. And where did they land, Manya?
They landed in the Hudson River.
And we have a picture of it there at the top of page 34. And there was a movie made about it. So we mentioned that yesterday. Manya, you've seen the movie, right?
Yes, it's called Sully.
All right. Just briefly, tell us what kind of stuck out to you in that movie, or what impacted you. What did you come away with after watching that?
Well, I thought it was just such an interesting movie in the way they filmed it because it jumps between time a lot.
Yeah.
They filmed the actual story, but as we read yesterday, this story happens in seconds. Mm-hmm. And so obviously they're not going to make a movie about 208 seconds long.
Right.
So they do also talk a lot about, in the movie, they show a lot about what happened after the incident and the investigation that took place.
Yeah, that was fascinating. They dig into the details and then go into the hearings. And actually, people in the hearing, they're kind of, I guess they're doing their job, but they're kind of accusing him, I guess you would say, or at least questioning him in a way that makes it look like he made the wrong decision. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much of that was played up for the movie, or, if they kind of dramatized that a bit. But at any rate, it was interesting to see how all of that played out.
It's a little bit heartbreaking, but I think even Captain Sully knew that an investigation was necessary, that it would be conducted in a situation like this.
Sure, they have to do that, right? And as you watch the movie, it's as that all plays out, and you see that in the end, he did make the right decision, it looked like, based on all of the research that they did. And they even do some simulations that show kind of how all that's playing out, but that's a big part of the movie as well. Don't want to give too much away, but I encourage you to watch it. Well, we are on page 35, and we're also talking about emotional intelligence. Josh, just quickly remind us of what that is.
So emotional intelligence is sort of an intelligence that relates to emotions, but also your own awareness of your own emotions and the emotions of others.
Yeah, sometimes we're not really aware. I think we see that word self-awareness a lot. We don't stop always to think about what's going on inside, right? But we can learn a lot when we do that. We need to unpack that, and we can draw from that experience. But we need to learn how to harness our emotions. Otherwise, we can be all over the place. And especially in a situation like this, in an emergency, we need to know how to harness our emotions. So that's what we're talking about with regards to emotional intelligence. So as we move on to page 35, we're going to have our first reading right now, just there on first column there on page 35, the left-hand side, down through line 16.
Drawing on years of experience, Sullenberger decided that his best chance of saving the 155 lives on board was to attempt something he had never done before. In fact, hardly any pilots had been trained to perform such a feat. Sullenberger would attempt to land in the Hudson River. Against all odds, just 208 seconds after the engines were struck, Sullenberger valiantly and safely guided the plane into the river near Midtown Manhattan. And due to the collective efforts of the captain, the first officer, traffic control, the flight attendants, and dozens of first responders, all 155 passengers and crew survived. The event has become known as the Miracle on the Hudson.
All right, so Sullenberger, he was drawing on years of experience. So we learned yesterday that all of this happened very quickly, that the birds struck the two engines and they had to think quickly. They didn't have a lot of time to make decisions. And so it was good that they had an experienced pilot in the seat because he was able, Captain Sullenberger, was able to draw on years of experience. Manya, when we say that phrase to draw on something, what do we mean?
It means that we're taking from years of experience, where we're acting on based on our experience.
Right. So he is using what he's learned. He's putting it into practice. And so Sullenberger decided that his best chance of saving those lives, of 155 people on board, was to attempt something that he had never, ever done before. And what was that, Josh? What did he need to do?
Well, so we're in a situation where he has just taken off from an airport. He's in New York. So this is an area where there's a lot of buildings. He doesn't think that there's enough time in order to get back to the airport. So he has to make a quick decision about where to put the airplane down because he's not going to be able to restart the engines again.
And that's where some people criticize him, at least this is how it played out in the movie, was why didn't you go back to the airport? You weren't that far. But he felt that he didn't have enough time to do that. It was a judgment call, and I think that was, of course, based on his experience.
Yes. I mean, now that everything has happened, we can look at it and go, the river was the only place where it was wide enough and smooth enough for him to land. And the engine was gone, so it didn't make sense for him to go back. So that was probably his thinking.
Exactly. And I would say that's why here the article says that it was such a feat, right? So such a difficult thing to do that really depended on a lot of skill because it was kind of the only choice that he had, but also that nobody's really done that, right?
And they're not trained to do so. Most pilots aren't.
Yes, I watched an interview that he did a few months ago, and he was talking about how when you are learning to be a pilot, you never actually get to try to do a water landing. You learn in the classroom what it might look like, but you actually never really try it out. So that was probably his first time doing a water landing.
Wow. Maybe more people should try it out. I guess it's kind of a hard thing to try out. I don't know. Anyway, Sullenberger would attempt to land in the Hudson River, and then against all odds, just 208 seconds after the engines were struck, Sullenberger valiantly and safely guided that plane into the river. That's what's amazing. Not one life was lost. And that word valiantly, Manya.
It just means bravely.
He was very brave. And they landed near Midtown Manhattan. And of course, as you can see in some of the pictures, there are buildings around. And there are even, these ferries coming out to help them. Maybe I think from the Coast Guard, it looks like. And, or some other, maybe police or personnel helping them onto those. And remember, it was really extremely cold, right? And so they couldn't stay in the water really long either. So that's another obstacle they had to face.
Yeah, so this is really a miracle, right? So for anyone who's not been to New York, the Hudson River is a big river, right? So, which means there's a lot of water moving, but also means that there's a lot of boats on the river.
Yeah,
people are use the river all the time in order to move people, goods, all sorts of things around. So it was in the wintertime. It was very cold. There were a lot of boats on the river. And this easily could have gone very, very, very wrong. But it was a miracle, really, that he was able to put down the plane safely and everyone was able to survive. Because usually that doesn't happen with crashes.
Yeah, every single person. And it was a collective effort, right? There are a lot of people involved. You know, you have the captain, the first officer, traffic control, right? They're talking about, they're calling in. He's calling in to the traffic control person. We see that played out in the movie. And the guy on the other end wants him, Anya, to he's trying to figure out different options for him, right? And then he just kind of is like, I think I need to land in the Hudson, and he goes for it, right?
Yeah.
And so, but the traffic control is involved, and the flight attendants, of course, and then we have first responders.
Yes, the people who show up after the plane has crashed into the river.
Right, these people on the boats, they're coming out there to help the people get off the plane.
Yeah, for people who aren't familiar with this term first responder, we use it, like Manya said, for the people who respond first, right, to come to emergency. So that can be, at least in the United States, could be police, could be firemen, could be ambulance, could be anyone who's trained in order to be the first people at an emergency.
Yeah, you'll see this term more so in North America and maybe not elsewhere. So those are the people who are responding in an emergency. Well, the event has become known as the Miracle on the Hudson, and for good reason. Well, next, we're going to continue to look back, and we're going to draw some conclusions about why Captain Sully Sullenberger did what he did and how emotional intelligence played a part.
Looking back, the now famous pilot remembers what he felt as if it had just happened. I was aware of my body, Sullenberger explains in his memoir. I could feel an adrenaline rush. I'm sure that my blood pressure and pulse spiked, but I also knew I had to concentrate on the tasks at hand and not let the sensations in my body distract me. For millions around the world, what Sullenberger accomplished on that winter day was superhuman, an amazing act of heroism. How did the captain, along with the first officer and traffic control officer, manage to keep his emotions in control and pull off this miracle? The answers are found not in those amazing moments, but rather in the years of training, practice, and experience that preceded them.
All right, so again, we look back, and how did the pilot feel? He gets into more of that, and he says, I was aware of my body, and he wrote this in his memoir, and that's a book that you write about your experiences, right?
Yes, it's my favorite kind of book to read.
Oh, why is that?
Well, I just like those types of books. A memoir is very similar to the word memory. So basically, it's a book. It's a collection of somebody's memories. So in this is Sully's memoir. That means that book is all about his memories.
That's right. And so he was aware of his body. Like, we talk about this word self-awareness. He was really in tune with what was going on, and he could feel an adrenaline rush, as we've talked about already. And he talks about his blood pressure again and how that spiked. But he also knew something else, Josh.
Well, that he had to concentrate on the task at hand and not let these sensations kind of distract him.
Right. If you're just focusing on what's going on with your body and you're not focused on the task at hand, they may all be dead right now, honestly. It may not have saved anybody. And so he had to put that aside. And that's really what we're getting at with this article. We're using this story to see how we can do that in our own lives and learn from Captain Sullenberger's story. For millions around the world, what he accomplished on that winter day was superhuman. And, some people call him a hero. He says he's not, but of course a lot of people look at him as a hero. And how did the captain, along with the first officer, the traffic control officer, how do they manage to keep, their emotions in check, right? And pull off this miracle? What does it mean to keep your emotions in check or in control?
That means you don't let your emotions get the best of you. You don't let your emotions dictate what you do or what you don't do.
That's right. And so you have them under control. And then we have this term pull off. Because they had their emotions in check, they were able to pull off this miracle. Especially the captain was able to pull off a miracle. That's kind of an informal phrase, but what does that mean, Joss, if you pull something off?
Well, if you pull something off, it usually means that you do something successfully, even though it might be sort of difficult or uncertain that you're going to be successful.
Right. It might be really unexpected that would happen, and you're able to pull that off. You pull off a win. Maybe there's two teams playing, and one's not nearly as good as the other, but they were able to kind of pull that off, right? Or that was unexpected. Well, the answers are found not in those amazing moments, but rather in the years of training, practice, and experience that preceded them. And so we're going to look back at Captain Sullenberger's past and see how that played a part during this traumatic event. As we go on to our last reading for today, we're going to learn about this practice and experience and how it played a part.
Practice makes ready. I think in many ways, as it turned out, my entire life up to that moment had been preparation to handle that particular moment. Sullenberger told journalist Katie Couric in an interview. The miracle on the Hudson well illustrates the power of emotional intelligence, the ability to identify, understand, and manage emotions, the ability to make emotions work for you instead of against you.
All right, so practice makes ready. Sullenberger says, I think in many ways, as it turned out, my entire life up to that moment had been preparation to handle this. Now, that's a big statement, right? And so think about your own life. How is what you've learned in the past preparing you for what's going on now?
Right. So usually when we think of this entire practice makes something, right? Usually we think of it as in terms of practice makes perfect.
Yes.
Right. So, for example, learning how to play an instrument or learning how to write an email or a response. So you do it over and over and again so that you really get good practice at doing something perfectly. But here we're talking about practice not making you perfect, but just making you ready for what can happen in the future. Like, say, for example, a really terrible situation while you're flying an airplane.
That's right. Yeah. Moni, do you ever think about that? Like what you've learned maybe in the past several years, how that can play a part now? Or maybe you've even noticed that. You're like, oh, I didn't know why I learned this many years ago, but now I understand. It's really helping me.
The first example that comes to mind is going to school. As a kid, sometimes I felt like, oh, what a drag, or oh, so annoying, like all these assignments. Oh, my teacher wants me to have due dates, turn things in on time and come out with plans and things like that. And in the moment as a kid, I thought maybe that's a little bit annoying. But I do recall in high school, my last year, thinking maybe this is preparing me for something. Yeah. And then getting to college and realizing, hey, I'm in charge of my own schedule now. But I know how to do this because in high school and elementary school, I had a lot of practice doing that kind of things.
Right.
So that's how I think practice makes ready.
That's right.
That's a really relatable thing, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I would say with Mania's example as well, so when you get out of college and you get into working in a job and you have a lot of different deadlines that happen at the same time, and you have to figure out how to balance that and still be able to work towards the deadlines and not maybe let if you're having a bad day, kind of get in the way of producing work. This is all sort of your experience building in order to help you deal with stuff that's happening in the moment.
Really good point. Yeah, maybe you feel like this is the last thing in the world I want to do, but you have to be able to harness those emotions and say, okay, I know I feel that way. It's not that you ignore how you feel, but you don't let it rule the day, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so feelings have a place, but doesn't mean they get to, rule everything in your life, because otherwise your life would be like a roller coaster, right? Going up and down constantly. But we're talking about learning from the past, and that's what Captain Sullenberger did. He learned things in the past, and it helped him in this traumatic moment that he was in. The Miracle on the Hudson illustrates the power of emotional intelligence, the ability to identify, understand, and manage emotions, the ability to make emotions work for you instead of against you. Now, I want to dig into that. That's a lot there. And, first of all, we have to identify, right, the emotion. If we can't identify it, then we may not know how to deal with it. We may not know what the problem is, right, Manya? We have to stop and reflect and think about, how do I feel? All right, and identify that. I mean, they even have a chart with lots of emotions on it that maybe you have trouble describing how you feel, and you can learn through that chart to point out and name the emotion that is going on in you. So first, identification is important.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common for people to be surprised when they have an emotional response to something, right? So maybe, for example, I had a bad day before coming to work, so I'm in a bad mood, and something happens at work, and I just have a really, really bad emotional reaction to it, and I'm kind of surprised by that because I don't know why I'm having such an emotional reaction.
That's it. You have to stop and ask why, right? And kind of unpack that.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you can just skip over it and you're like, yeah, I felt that way. I don't know why. Okay, I'm going to the next thing. Sure. And then it's still kind of there, and it just kind of may create some pain or bitterness inside, and because you didn't deal with it, right? So you have to identify it and then try to understand it and then manage it. My goodness, Manya, I think trying to manage emotions is not an easy task.
It really isn't. And I think in this day and age, with social media, you see people sort of releasing their emotions online.
There's even little emojis, right, of how you feel.
Yeah, and a lot of times it might be harmless, but in some situations I've seen public figures share their frustration and then later, maybe a day later, have to apologize because what they said was inappropriate because they were acting out of their emotion and unable to manage their emotion in that moment.
That's a good point. Now, we don't want to bottle everything up and never express, maybe you're really angry, but you don't express that. You have to be careful how you do that and the timing. But I think sometimes we want to do it right away, and maybe we should wait and then figure things out, right? But we do want to express things, but we need to do it in the right time, the right way. So managing your emotions. Any thoughts about managing emotions, Josh?
Well, if we want to talk here, definitely about sort of emergency situations. I know there are many different kind of emergencies that you can run into day-to-day life. If you have children, you're going to run into many emergencies at home. Or you might run into situations where quite quickly things could go really bad if you don't react in a certain way. So, for example, there's been a couple of times when I've been in the water and working with other people where somebody's been at danger of drowning. And you have to be very clear about what you're going to do in a short period of time in order for things to turn out well. And it can be really difficult when you have a really powerful emotional response to think clearly, right? But if you realize what's going on is that you're having this powerful emotional response, there's something about this sort of idea of emotional intelligence that allows you to kind of almost set it aside and be like, oh, okay, so I'm panicking right now, but what that really means is that I'm going to have a lot of energy in order to do something. So if I stop thinking about how scared I am and start thinking about what it is that I need to do, then that energy that I have from the panic will help me do what I need to do.
Really good point. It reminds me of the thing is, the emotion, the thing you're feeling may seem like this is reality. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's just how you feel about something, but it doesn't paint your whole world. And sometimes we let that emotion paint our whole world. We have to kind of get back away from it a bit and say, hey, this isn't everything. This is just what happened in this moment. And there are other things to consider. And so that, I think, can help us to kind of settle down a bit. But Manya, here at the end of day 2, it says that we need to have this ability to make emotions work for you instead of against you. That sounds terrific, but how in the world can we do that? We'll get into even more of this later, but before we go today, how, just briefly, do you think we can do that?
Personally, I would probably identify what emotions I am feeling and then asking myself why I'm feeling this.
Why is it, we talked about identification, but why do you think it's so important to identify the emotion?
Because sometimes we don't take time to think about it and we just experience it.
Yes.
And then who knows what you'll do in that moment because you're just simply experiencing it. But if you can intentionally identify it, then it's probably easier to decide what course of action you want to take.
That's all very important. You used a really good word there, intentional. We need to be intentional about it. I think that looks like taking a moment aside and saying, okay, what's going on, and trying to identify it. If you just keep going about your day, then you may lose that opportunity. And even at the end of every day, you can stop and maybe even journal some things. Maybe you had this feeling and that, and why is that? And you try to write it out and try to identify it and try to get to the root of it and we always want to deal with the root issue.
Right. So let's say maybe I could take another example that a lot of people might identify with. Public speaking, right? When you have to speak in front of other people, everybody gets nervous. Mm-hmm. Well, most everybody gets nervous, unless people have really practiced a lot and a lot and a lot. I get nervous when I'm supposed to speak in front of a group of people, but the other thing that happens when I get nervous is that I tend to have a lot more energy in my voice because I want to talk quickly, right? But instead of talking quickly, if I can use that energy in order to really talk loudly and clearly so that people can hear me, then that's using that sort of emotional response for a good result, as opposed to letting the emotions kind of like take control of my responses.
You're rechanneling that energy.
Rechanneling is a good way to put it. So you're taking, instead of one direction, you're moving it into a slightly different direction that's better for you.
That's right. And even it makes me think of perspective, right? Sometimes we have one perspective about something and we need to change our perspective, right? In order to maybe be in line with reality. And so that's important to stop and think about that as well. If you're discouraged about something, think about your perspective. Maybe you can change that and that will help in that area. Well, tomorrow we're going to finish up our psychology article and we'll talk more about what's related to identifying and understanding emotions and so forth. So we hope you will join us and really hope that, this powerful story kind of will help you in your daily life, not the story itself, but the meaning behind it. So we hope that you're enjoying it and you'll be back tomorrow. Until then, this is Brandon.
I'm Manya.
And I'm Josh.
Saying goodbye.
Goodbye.